I strongly recommend you slowly and definitely with some attention to detail, take your machine apart and see how the components fit together. It's not that you'll never need to disassemble, you certainly will, but if something gets jammed inside, and it will at one point or another, you'll be able to rescue it. If you have no clue, then it'll give you a lot less confidence. So to give you more confidence, I strongly suggest people do dismantle their machines gently to a point, and then just see how the parts go together. Read your manual. Please get a manual for your machine and read it. And if you don't understand it, ask. Watch some videos, okay? Because some point or another, you'll break a needle and you won't realize it. Something like this. And it'll cause havoc. Things will just not run smoothly. So if you can find this little guy, it will make your machine work so much better. So just know that it's not a bad idea, as I recommend to new users, which may or may not feel something you can do. You can do it, okay? You totally can. All right, so you are looking at my Legare. This machine, while very similar to other CSMs, has a slightly different way of making the stitches. You may notice by looking at this, which is the camshell, that it comes quite high to what this is referred to here, which is the cylinder spring. It has a few more differences that you may or may not notice if you have seen other machines out there. One of the other things that are different is the stitch dial, which changes or adjusts how tight or loose a stitch is by how many turns in one direction or the other. Much the same as many other CSMs out there. Those slight differences that I've noted also hide a difference that's inside, which is the cam. Which in this machine allows you to work forward or backward without having to lift a needle. It's not a big deal to need to lift needles to go in reverse. It's just one of the key features the Legare setup has, which I adore. My ribber assembly sits nicely in the large and the small hole here. And also a quick note for everybody out there, whenever you have your machine with needles in it and the yarn carrier, whatever style you have, please be very aware that you should not be moving the carrier, the handle around the machine at breakneck speeds. You should move it very slowly. You want to make sure you don't bash and clash any of the cylinder needles. They are quite close to the yarn carrier when it's normally in correct position. And you may not even realize it, that in your, oh, it's fun to play, it's very cool. Of course it is. You may damage one of the latches in the needle without realizing it. Basically, when there is no yarn on the machine, this latch tends to kind of flop open, misbehave, and you can see that it already would come out so much further from the needle, and it's very easy to damage it without even realize you are. And then later on you'll have issues and you'll be like, why is it doing that? You may not be aware that you've damaged something earlier. Okay, so we've taken the ribber arm off. We've noticed there's these two holes on this design. Now all Legares have a big hole and a small hole. It's how it sits securely in the machine. Now some machines might have a slightly bent, or this might be slightly bent, or it might be rusty. So when you go to put it in its ribber rest, it may not behave. So you should just know that it should definitely sit all the way down, okay? The other thing that I want you to note, this ribber arm should always have ribber height screw and always a nut to lock it in its height adjustment. This is actually a screw that goes all the way through down to the lower area. Let's see if I can get a light to show you. Mamma mia. There we are. So this screw is coming all the way through and it's actually pushing on the machine. So it's resting. So that's the other thing too. If you've put the arm on the machine and you look here and the bottom of that screw isn't touching the machine, sometimes it's just because there's a tightness between this big ribber arm and the small ribber peg. So a good choice to help it to sit in place is always to be gentle on your machine. Is to just take a soft surface thing like a screwdriver and just tap it and see if that tiny area in there is now seated correctly. Because later on, when you are more familiar with using your ribber, if you put it in the machine and something's not working here, before you do all of that, just make sure it's always seated in place is all that I'm trying to say here. So let's just return our lights. All right, so that's the ribber arm. Now, when it's not seated on the machine, where can you put it? You certainly don't want to damage this thing. One place to have it, if your machine has it, is this kind of ribber stand. I prefer to put my yarn pretty much where this guy is. So what I've done is I've just created a secure stand for it. You don't have to, but that's just something I do. Then I know this big piece of metal is going to be safe. So you're just seeing the main bed of the machine, the main part. You're actually not seeing the top part in this view. So let's just stand up for a moment. I call this a yarn topper just because it's the top and you thread the yarn through it. It is one of Dave Lord's custom products. It has an upgraded English style. It's a counterbalance. Most of us feel if you're using this kind of heel spring that it actually provides a much even weight or pull on your tension of your yarn than the old style or the vintage style of heel spring, which is just a bouncy kind of wiry spring. Sure, it goes by other names on my parts, called a yarn stand top as well. So something like that. Now, if yours doesn't look like this, and in fact it looks so different, you really don't know what's going on, I actually have pictures of other ones on my website, which you can find in the index page. Look up yarn toppers, which shows pictures on how to thread them. And again, if you don't know, can't find, email me, no problem. All right, so this is the yarn topper. I call this the yarn stand or yarn mast. It doesn't really matter what it's called. Pretty much it goes by yarn stand in one of my parts list. It's just something that's holding the yarn topper in the alignment of the middle of the machine, which is poorly lined. There we go. There we go. So when you are having it all threaded up and the yarn comes through and then down, it goes directly into the center of the machine, which is really the point of this contraption here. I have a custom one here from Dave Lord, this yarn mast, where it divides in the middle so you can unscrew it from traveling. It's not a huge long piece then, it's just two smaller pieces. But I've also asked for a specific style which goes way out, down, and then way back to attach to the base. Most of the ones out there are up a little bit and then out and then up to attach to a topper, or they're just one straight post. It doesn't matter what post style you have as long as it basically routes the yarn to the center of the machine. That's really the purpose. All right, so let's just go down. A little bit more of an introduction. Now, what you're seeing here is a very popular light called Bright Tech light. It normally comes with a lens, and you can't see it's quite bright. I actually have two in my setup, one with the magnifier still in it. If you have a dark area, you just won't be as successful. So the brighter your area is, the better. So with the Bright Tech lamp, if you wanted to make it like this, where the yarn will go through and that it applies direct, even light on the top of your machine, so you just loosen this kind of ribbed area here. It's a circle that kind of undoes, and then the lens can come out and you can put it back together. So you could kind of see the slot where it was sitting before. I have both just in case I need a close-up look of anything. I'm not quite there for the need to do it more often, but magnification is a good thing. I failed to tell you how to take apart your yarn mast. It's very simple. A lot of machines out there may or may not have the screw. When I got mine, I didn't have a screw, but the post just sits in the hole that's there. Basically, all this screw is just holding the post better into the mount. So just undo that screw. Yes, it is A-slotted. And then you'd have most easy ability just to kind of lift it up and out. With it tightened with a screw there, which I drilled and then secure, won't fall off. But that's really how easy that is to undo. And it's the same thing, a screw holding it on top. When it comes to whatever yarn topper you have, there's a screw just holding it on. And when you do install or even remove, make sure when you reinstall that it's actually flush on the top so it doesn't get in the way of where any yarn path might be. This style, actually the yarn doesn't go anywhere near where it's attached, but some of the vintage ones, the hole that holds, that tightens this part onto the mast is like right here, and it would be in the way if it wasn't flush to the top of the machine. So that's pretty straightforward. I'm not sure I said in the video, but this is Dave Lord's Chambord CSM yarn topper, but actually I've put a shrink wrap tubing on it just to make it a little more grippy here for when I am adding the counterweight heel spring, so that it doesn't slip so much, which is something I notice can happen. So this is your machine without the ribber. These needles are set up in every second slot. These are the cylinder needles. There you go. I have marked my cylinder. This is a 72 needle slot cylinder. Now, the cylinder itself will come with, I don't have any of them that you can see, but the cylinder itself will be marked. So you will look close and you'll be like, oh, there's a line in one of these fins, or it's at a kind of a slanted cut, so you can see that they're not all square. That's just the manufacturer having marked kind of the halfway point. Now, that's another point that I feel strongly about. Now, you can certainly use your machine as you got it. Certainly you can. But there are a few extra marks that might be helpful for you. Certainly will be helpful for you. For later when you're making socks, you need to know where to stop for your increases, your decreases. And if you're totally new at socks, a general rule of thumb is to kind of indicate on your cylinder the clock marks, such as 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and 9 o'clock. I find all of my cylinders, I've marked those. And I've just recently started marking the inside of my cylinder because I've used nail polish on a clean, dry surface, and I've applied it a thin layer and then let it dry, and then a thin layer and let it dry, and thin layer and let it dry, because it's easy to remove if you need to, but it also will eventually wear off. Actually, it wears off sooner than I'd like, but that's just how that is. And you can put a nail polish reference mark anywhere on your machine without damaging it, unless you're actually placing it on your painted finish. Be careful. If I needed to move this red one over one, I could totally do that without damaging anything. So marks are good because they give you that reference point no one ever told me in the past about. I just kind of figured it out myself. So Yes, your cylinder will come with some little funny marks on them, but they won't have enough marks. And maybe those marks aren't for you and how you set up your machine. Wouldn't you want to use it with it set up for success? That's what I'd like to say. All right, so why there are colors here is this on this cylinder relates to the cylinder markings for working mostly on a sock. And generally, most projects I've started, they start at 3 o'clock on the clock dial. So for me, this is the 6 o'clock position, which is pointing to my belly button. This is how I'm sitting at the machine. More on alignment again on my website. And this is the 3 o'clock position. Now this position here, the first slot afterwards will either be a cylinder needle or a ribber needle. If you never use your ribber needle, that's perfect. A ribber setup, that's perfectly fine. But for my alignment, for where my marks are and how I sit at my machine, this first slot will always be a ribber needle if I'm using my ribber. For some setups, it'll be the second one. You will know on your alignment as you use your ribber and how things best align with it. It'll make more sense later, don't worry. But this is why 3 o'clock is important, because in order to do things on the machine, we always prep ahead of time what we're going to do in the future. Now that makes no sense now as we are first introducing the machine, but it will later. So if we were to start right here, when we do start right here, when it matters with our project yarn, our yarn carrier would be here, somewhere over here. Okay, the reason why basically is, I don't know if you can see it, this is the yarn carrier. The internal parts of the machine, the V-cam, see how it's in here. So if I wanted to do something over here, I can easily raise a needle. The cylinder spring is holding it in place and up. I can easily do that, but I cannot easily do that. These ones are all locked in where the V-cam is. So this is the other reason why we do stuff in advance, is once it's engaged in the machine, it's kind of going for the ride. So you'll have to prepare things in advance. It'll make more sense as you review the other videos, but there is reasons why we do things at certain points. All right, and I want you to have all the success as possible. All right, so at this point, we're looking at our machine and we want to take the needles out. Now you can certainly, with taking the needles out, you can leave them in and just take the cylinder out and take them out together. But I find that's really finicky because, of course, the V-cam is locking in those cylinder needles. Now a cylinder needle actually looks like this. It's long, it's skinny, and it has a butt or a foot. So that butt that we're looking at right now, this bottom part, is what is trapped underneath this V-cam. So if I took apart the screws that are holding this cylinder in and I tried to lift it straight up, of course, these needles would be like, no, I can't clear this V-cam and it'll get stuck. And you know what? These needles aren't the least expensive thing out there, so I want to baby them. So if I change a cylinder, I always take the needles out first. Now, if you don't want to, that's your call, but certainly that's what I do. So there's a few ways to do this. There's an easier way and a less easy way. So one way is to find out where the cam is not locking the needle in place. See how that one's locked and that one is not. And you could just simply bend it over and take it out of the cylinder. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it, I can go forward or backward. I'm going to do so very gently. I just want to show you where the cylinder rest is. Cylinder spring rest. Now this part here on my machine is a divot that's built in that my cylinder spring can just rest on. I've seen many machines with the cylinder spring rest of some sort. Perhaps yours has as well if it's not a Legare. But the basic idea with this is you need to kind of scooch in I'll do it where it's harder. Another way to do this is just push gently on a cylinder needle so that you can easily see the spring. There it is. Be gentle and just lay it on the rest. There we go. And then now that the rest is holding the spring and the yarn carrier is actually at the back of the machine, that's where the V-cam is, and it's locking those needles in place. All you can do is just lift them right up. So taking those needles out is super easy if you're able to put the cylinder spring on a rest, because nothing is holding them in. So we're just going to continue here, going very gentle so we don't bash and clash. Actually, a better idea whenever you're moving the yarn carrier and it's not threaded and there's needles is to disengage, which means just bring the face of the yarn carrier away from the cylinder and just release the screw and just kind of push it. Now it can't possibly bash or clash anything, okay? That would be ideal. I fully recommend that. Of course, slightly tightening it means it won't dance anywhere. All right, so now we can easily remove needles like nobody's business. You may have noticed the cylinder is loaded every second needle. It's because I was making hats. I am testing different options on how a person with a regular setup machine, a Legare, for example, with a 72 cylinder and 36 ribber, how they can change how they use those things in the machine to kind of change how well-fitting an adult hat will be. You can make hats on these machines. So now all the cylinder needles are out. The ribber attachment part, ribber accessory, it goes by a couple names. On the Legare system, this is a separate part that has one single screw here, and which goes down underneath the machine. So this is what it looks like on the inside of the machine. Goes down and it connects to the ribber accessory by just sitting in this slight slot. So if I move this one way or the other, okay, now we'll move it again. Oh, look at, I'm making a line. That's how well it fits in my cylinder. There, so I'm just moving the adjuster back and forth. And this matters later when you use the ribber, because that changes how the ribber slots align to the cylinder. So that has quite a lot of movement to it. It doesn't look like it's moving much, but it actually is. And this also outlines another part with this part, is it has to sit correctly in order to be functional. And sitting correctly means it sits almost exactly flush against the machine here. If there's a space, it can get caught on your knitting, and you don't want that, okay? So this bump of this accessory part, it actually connects to your rubber dial. Whatever screw it is in there now, the original screw was a slotted screw. A slotted screw is a flat head screw like this. It's for a screwdriver. So this is one of these. So this is really cool, not related to CSMs, because this slot easily is short enough to get and open that flathead screw in there. And this wrench is something that works on all the nuts pretty much on the machine. I've just added some extra stuff here so it's convenient. I had a few extra ones. I gave them away in the beginning. Wow, they're expensive to buy if you just need that. But if you have Dremel or a rotary tool, you'll get a couple and you can use them for your machine. Very useful. Otherwise, find yourself a non-magnetic screwdriver. This is what I have. These parts come out. And this is good to have something with a bit of torque for under the cylinder so you can undo the screw inside. I haven't found too many of those really stubby screwdrivers. Then of course you just need the flathead one for the standard screws that would be on your machine. I have found that there are some sellers out there when they are selling their refurbished and or just antique vintage Legares, that they're changing the screws out, which is fine because something was wrong with that screw, obviously. But some of the screws that they're using are screws which, if your country doesn't really support those types of screws, would be an issue if you needed to undo it and you didn't have that part to undo it for. If you are the owner of a machine with screws that are not slotted and are not, or even the Phillips, then certainly you may want to consider contacting Dave Lord and just getting replacement screws. They're very inexpensive and it's so much easier to have a slotted screw. And certainly if your old screws that you have are really worn and hard to turn, certainly upgrade your screws. It's totally worth it. All right, let's continue. Let's take those screws off. A gentle undo. So these screws, they look like this. It is the same design used elsewhere on the machine. So I've got two of those. Every cylinder on the Legare has two holes. So your question might be, I have an auto knitter cylinder. Will it work on my Legare? Actually, it would if it had the holes. The holes are a different alignment underneath. But if you bought your cylinder from a different supplier, say for example, Jackie Grant in New Zealand, some of her cylinders actually have multiple holes, so they're more universal. You could use that as a cylinder if you chose. All right, so I have removed the screws and I can rotate the cylinder a little bit, but we're still connected by the rubber accessory, which will make more sense once you're able to see it. Sometimes it's just easier to use your fingers, especially if you're videoing. It always happens when you're videoing. Oh, I dropped the screw. Now be very careful. I've heard persons online, loose screws, and other persons saying they can go to the hardware store for it. I've gone to the hardware store in Canada. I have not found any of the screws whenever I've looked for them. So I always just order them from Dave. So this is what that part looks like. I've marked it so I know which one perfectly aligns to my cylinder. If you buy a brand new cylinder from anyone, the inside profile might differ than the vintage ones. And this is a vintage rubber accessory part. Actually, this may not be, but regardless. So you might find that it fits perfect on one cylinder for alignment and doesn't fit perfect the next one. So for my recommendation, I would recommend marking it. And I have one for each cylinder I have. This is the screw. It's just another slotted one, super easy to use. In some scenarios, you might need to use a washer to have it sit just the right way. And you just, basically it's beveled and it just attaches on the inside. There we go. No sharp points. It's flush against the cylinder when it's installed. Otherwise, you never need this part unless if you're not using the rubber, okay? So everything is removed. Let's take that out. And let's just look at it while we're here. So other questions I've had from persons is how often do I need to clean it? Well, look at your cylinder. Mine is going to be oily, which is perfectly fine. Keep a rag nearby always. You may not realize how dirty it is. If you've done a whole lot of socks or anything on the machine, you may not realize that the fiber or lint actually get caught in the cylinder slots. And so, I mean, maybe you're not there yet, but if you've gotten your machine online from someone who may have used it a lot, and maybe they're not aware of this slot buildup. Oh, there's a tiny bit. You can't really see it. I recently totally cleaned mine, so I'd be surprised if I find a lot in here, but it can happen. Being very gentle, you can just take your stitch tool and run that through, or you can also just use a denture brush or just anything that you'll never put in your mouth again. And so that's basically the maintenance of it. Each of my cylinders has its own cylinder spring. Extra of those is always a good idea. Extras of the cylinder screws are also a good idea. You wouldn't want to lose one and then not be able to put things back together. Extras of the screw that holds your rubber accessory in is also a good idea. All right, so this is what the cylinder looks like on the Legare. For this vintage one, it's posted, or rather it's stamped 12 as in 12 gauge. It's stamped 72 as in 72 needle slots. That's pretty much all there is to look at, other than seeing the screw hole that you see here that the rubber accessory was attached to. Now, if you just turn the inside of the cylinder, you will know no other side has a hole there. So yeah, there's only one way you can put your cylinder in. Certainly, you can put it together and both screws will engage if you put it the right way, or if you put it the wrong way with the rubber accessory away from the connector under the machine. Both ways will install, but if you try to use the rubber, there's no hole here for your rubber accessory, so that won't help. So just know that you need to put that hole on the inside of your cylinder where it'll connect to the rubber accessory, and then of course the dial adjuster underneath, which is this guy. So if you want things to work together, you have to do the alignment. It's very easy actually. Okay, so we're done with the cylinder. Now what I like to do is I like to show people the inside of the machine. Now, if you were working away and you suddenly, it's crunchy, it's something, it's extra tension, and you've identified it's nothing you can see, no yarn caught anywhere, it might be that broken needle butt that I showed you in the beginning. So this is where you just look inside and see if it's just sitting in here somewhere or if it's fallen to the floor. So this is the prime opportunity to take your rag that you have nearby and just wipe down all the surfaces. I just wanted to also show you, so where the yarn carrier is, there's a yarn carrier, that this is the V-cam. I suppose it's called a V-cam because it's a V shape. So in this scenario, this cam system, as I said earlier, allows you to go forward and reverse without having to lift needles. Now, certainly you don't need to have this style in order to make a toe or a heel, which is why you'd want to be able to go in reverse, but it does help when something's jammed. You have more universal access to your stitches. Of course, you wouldn't just go in reverse if it's loaded without being aware of the live stitches, because you will drop stitches if you go in reverse and you're not watching those live stitches. But yeah, that's basically what it looks like. So if you've taken apart your machine, I recommend you do not unscrew this and take anything here that's attached apart. I do not recommend it. Do not take apart this screw or this one and the way this sets up. If you need to, you can certainly take these two screws apart, and you can certainly, let me just continue the other way, these two screws. Now both of those lower screws, that one on the, those two on the right and these two on the left, they are holding in the up throw cam or uplift cam. See how it easily flops? So that's when it's correctly installed. If you've tightened one or both too much and you can't just kind of flip it, then loosen them so that they can move easily. Otherwise you'll have issues when you're knitting. So what does that look like on the inside? So, oh, I just found some dirt. So those screws control that one and that one on this side. And that's, I mean, you see it? There we go. So that's what happens inside the machine. It's pushing the needles up to do its work. And then on this one, same deal. And that's also where you can see there's some fiber, some dirty fiber there. Just move this. And so when you are looking at it to clean something, make sure you also look for fiber that's dirty like that. That is nothing right now, so you don't really have to worry about it, but it can get quite compact and kind of get in the way. Let's take off the yarn carrier. The yarn carrier is just held on by one screw right here. I don't know if you can see that. There we are. One right here. So we are going to do that. There we go. Yarn carriers for the Legare have this U-shape attachment, and the vintage ones are one piece that just kind of look like an elbow. Now they certainly work, but I find that sometimes different cylinders, you need to be closer to the cylinder, and so try to get a one piece, a perfect closeness and height is quite difficult. So why not just get something that works better? And again, this one allows you to disengage, which allows you to work on something if you need to, without having to worry about bashing and clashing. The latches and the needles sit quite close to the face of the yarn carrier, so you will find that it will touch it once in a while and it will wear it, but that's perfectly fine. All right, so at this point, the main part of the machine, the cam shell, actually on this version, so this Legare is one that has these components here on, oh, that's the cog ring, yeah. All right, so there's a screw here that you see that's contacting a part on the cylinder. And there's another on the other side. Now, this is not a feature you're going to find on all Legares. This is a feature that I've been told is a newer feature on this version. And basically all this allows you to lengthen the screw here or shorten, and allow you to change the timing of where in the wave of a stitch happening in regards to the yarn carrier, where that happens, kind of like to time the yarn carrier. I'm not sure it's something that's really needed because you just set it once and you never need to touch it again. But it does allow you that feature that, or the older model of the Legare didn't have. The older model just had something that wasn't adjustable here. It's just a solid piece that connects to go in one direction and a solid piece that connects to go in the other direction. So if you're working away and you have this, make sure that they're firmly in place. I have double nuts on the screw, and I've asked Dave when he painted my machine just to paint them like attached so they're locked into place, because you never need to change that. The other thing that you will note is my yarn carrier base is assembled on the same side as the stitch gauge. That it's not on the other side. This makes no sense to someone who might be new. It's because there's nothing on this side for it to engage with. So in order for it to function correctly, this cog ring, which has a ramp, you see that it pushes that uplift cam up. It pushes that uplift cam up. Let's just show you the inside. I don't know if you can see that. There we are. That one's up. That one's up. There we are. And why that matters is if you assemble the machine where the yarn carrier ramp is wrongly added to the machine on the other side, obviously the stitches won't come up to knit and do their goodness. So here we go. Let's take off the shell. Now it's very oily, and that's perfectly normal. So what I do, I always, if I ever am taking it apart, is I just run my rag. Be very careful not to drop anything. Better to do it over a table and not in the air like I'm doing. There we are. And the bottom of that is what this looks like. Now, a refurbished machine might work smoother because all the kind of uneven metals might have been smoothed, which is very nice. So let's just put this down over here. And so now we're looking at the cog ring, and it's called that because it has all the cogs. And so this is where you can see better where the yarn carrier mount is on the cog ring, and both of the yarn carrier timing screw adjustments are. And again, not all Legares have these, and they're really not essential. You don't really need to change that. All right, there we go. So it's very important that when you are using your machine, that you use the machine with enough oil. There's no such thing as too much other than making a mess, but certainly not enough is an issue because it'll grind metal on metal. All right, I'm just going to put that part there. So now what you're looking at is something called a bed plate. Very straightforward because it is the bed of the machine. There are different bed plates out there. One of the reasons the slang of calling this a Legare 400 came about is the model of this part is a 400, as in this part is called the 400 part. All of the parts actually have numbers on them. I'm not sure about the camshell, but on the tappet and on the ribber arm, I'll show you later, they all have numbers. And so for this, there are just some channels. It's always a good idea to wipe it with your cloth, your rag. When metal is on metal and there's not enough oil, it may cause minute filings, metal filings, or dirty oil. So it's important that you continue to put lots of oil on it just to kind of flush that. You just can't go wrong. I have a dollar store mat, spongy rubber bottom mat under my machine so to protect the floor if something drops. And the floor from any oil. Now is the crank wheel. Now there's no cog ring, so it just kind of flops around. It's actually connected by this bolt here. You may not have a yarn counter or a row counter, but there'll still be a screw that holds the crank wheel on the machine. Your handle will also have a much smaller wooden handle. And it'll be a permanent handle that you can't come off, that won't come off. They designed them so that it had a permanent kind of anchor here, and then a post, the wood, and then a permanent anchor on the outside that they probably hammered closed, which is fine if you never need to change your handle or you don't want to change your handle or anything like that. But for what I wanted to have something more beautiful, and I wanted to have something that maybe was longer and easier to hang on to. So I had asked Dave Lord if he had any suggestions. He suggested that I send him my crank wheel after we talked about it, and I did. And what he did is he refabricated the inside post for this handle, and he fabricated a screw that would fit in that post that would be screwed on that I can use with his handle. So this handle actually is designed by Dave, but I asked for it not to be painted. So I painted it myself with a fancy product called Unicorn Spit. And I varnished the heck out of it afterwards, which makes it shiny and the color I prefer, and I love it. All right, so there we are. While I would normally show this being dismantled and reinstalled, I don't find there's any issue for it. But that's basically just a screw here. I mean, you know how to undo a screw. All right, so here is the ribber on my own custom stand, so disregard that colored base. I'm just using this to kind of hold the ribber in place. We haven't dismantled the ribber yet, so let's get to the ribber. I have already mentioned the ribber height screw and the nut. That's really useful. So this is your ribber dial or ribber arm, ribber assembly. It actually is a simple but very complex thing. You can see the part of the Legare 400 setup is 418. That's just the design of this. You'll notice if you were looking at the comparisons between the 400 Deluxe model and the 47 Less Deluxe is that the 47 is more square, where this one is more round. There might be an alignment difference too in regards to the height and those kinds of things. I have been advised that this little divot on the arm has been something that might have been for a row counter in the past, but I have never seen a row counter using this. All right, so here is your ribber arm. We have all of the components here assembled. What you're looking at is a ribber arm, the tappet, which is just this part here, this darker green component. Strictly the Legare system has a switch like this that you can push out of work or in work, and that's just basically engaging the components inside that can tell the ribber needles to start working or to not work if they are out of work. You do this in this machine setup when you want to engage or differentiate between plain knitting and ribbing, and we do that mostly when we start a cuff down sock or a top down sock in the edge which is called a salvage. And we do that as a first step or two, or if not 3 or 4, so that when everything is off the machine and the scrap yarn is off your project yarn, it doesn't undo because of the application or salvage method that we have followed with. This will make more sense when you start doing socks, but basically the reference to the word salvage is the method or recipe that we use. There are different ones which lock in those first row of stitches so that when we remove the sock and the scrap, it doesn't undo. Okay, so having an in-out switch is quite useful, although the old machines that didn't have this lovely in-out feature, they would just simply disengage and take everything apart if they were taking it off the machine, which seems really hard. So I'm so glad I have this switch. Anyways, on the Legare, in towards the middle of the machine is activated or engaged, and out towards the outside of the machine is deactivated or disengaged. On the auto knitter system, when you look at the tappet, instead of this lovely kind of brass part, an auto knitter tappet always has a wire or a thick gauge wire that has an in-out activation, and it actually works in reverse. Both tappets, universally, this is the design most tappets are. A switch that goes in and out. It has a dial gauge here. This is actually the stitch tension adjuster for the rubber needles. That's a lot to say. So what that actually means is this part is for cylinder needles. This part is for rubber needles. Honestly, once you set it, if you're using pretty much the same yarn, you really don't need to adjust it. I generally keep mine in the middle of the beginning to end. It's about middle. And to adjust that, you unscrew, lift, adjust, and then screw it down to make it firm. It's very easy to set. And like I said, once you set it, I tend to leave it. I have no problems with it. You would change this towards the outside if you wanted the rubber needles to kind of extend more, or towards the inside more if you wanted them to kind of stay within the center more. And there's really no need for most applications. All right, so that's the tappet from the top. As you can tell, the whole system rotates. Basically, there is a screw. I should have looked at the front of it. There's a screw here. This looks familiar, right? It looks like a cylinder screw. This screw is holding this rubber post from the bottom, which is underneath. So it's like a flat bottom screw, or post, sorry, a flat bottom post that goes up the middle, and it's holding everything in place with this screw. I want you to note that if you are assembling, or mostly when you're putting it back together later, that when you are assembling, you always assemble with no spaces, okay? So this post is underneath, it's flush, there's no space, the rubber dial, the tappet sitting on top, there's no spaces, and then you just hold it up. So if you were to reassemble it, you would hold the bottom of the post and gently just hold it in place and tighten and or loosen that screw right there, okay? So just so you know, it's very important that when you're reassembling, because it's all about alignment, that you don't leave a space in there. Actually, that's pretty universal. And no spaces in there. Okay. Because it's always about reproducing what you've done before. All right, so then what else am I looking at? This tappet is actually one made by Dave Lord, Chambord CSM. And how you can tell that, if you know what you're looking at, is it has the C on it. He's kind of marked it, and that's what it means. And actually, he's even marked out for out of work and in for in work. That's something the vintage one doesn't have, any marks on what's happening in or out. The vintage 400 one also has MMA-3 or something over here somewhere, which is one way to identify if it is beyond obviously being a Legare one, if it's the standard Legare tappet. So that's pretty much it. When you look at it though, let's flip it back around. You can see that there's this L-shaped thing. This is the drive pin, because with this pin in place, it drives or helps push the system setup to work forward when we are working with the ribber. And it's easily something that just drops down the middle and engages to the back of this screw right here, the screw head. This actually is your timing screw. And a good trick that I've developed is to put an extra nut. Put an extra nut there so it won't undo. Yes, this screw is actually threaded on the inside here. It's not sitting loose, and it usually has one nut. But when you work on the machine, you get a lot of vibrations, and over time, vibrations can make things undo. So the more secure the extra important parts are, the better and more sane you'll be. Trust me. So basically this here, how far apart the screw is adjusted to the setup outwards dictates how much the ribber needles react in regards to their placement when they are ribbing. So this doesn't make a lot of sense now, but I do intend to do a video on timing your ribber and using it specifically. Although you may find some general information already on any sock videos I've done, specifically the cuff down rib sock, which is available under the menu of learning and creating on my website, my sock video, YouTube videos. In any case, so these are just the general parts. So the things we would never purposely undo is we wouldn't purposely undo this willy-nilly if we didn't know that or didn't want to change the timing. So generally this is kind of something you set it and you kind of leave it, but be aware you might need to adjust it with some yarns. And even if just to turn it just slightly. So generally with this screw, when we are using it to time, we don't just turn it. With this, we use minute turnings or minute adjustments. If I were to be timing it right now, I might take this horizontal alignment of the screw, loosen the back, of course, and then just turn it, doesn't matter, any direction, so that the slot is vertical. So just turning it maybe a quarter of the way, and then retightening everything and just seeing how it reacts to a loaded machine. And what this actually does, it's the changing of the needles right where the yarn carrier is, right where the stitches are opening and closing, or more closing than opening, because a North American correct timing of a Legare and or auto knitter or most machines is that the needles close in order. So regardless to how many cylinder needles you have or how many ribber needles you have, basically at the yarn carrier, when it is making stitches, the first needle will go, the one right beside it will close, the one right beside it will close, and the right one beside that will be closed. It closes in order. It closes 1, 2, 3, 4. If you do, if you are curious, and certainly I was, and why not, you should be, remove your nuts of your timing screw and just completely make it long or make it short and just see how it affects. I went through the range of adjustments until I got the right one, but I found I also worked through ones where the first two were closing and then the last two were closing, or the first and the third closed, and then the second and the fourth closed. And if you aren't dropping any stitches, then hey, that works for you. But generally it's 1, 2, 3, 4, okay? And when you are doing the timing, which I should not be talking about now because this is not what this video is, sorry, then you need to go as slow as 1 needle closing at a time to watch it, okay? It's not impossible, but it is precise. Back to what we're talking about here. All right, so do not lose this drive pin, this L-shaped pin. Dave Lord now makes a beautiful straight one as long as it fits in the hole and this end part connects with the screw head. That's all that matters, okay? So if you had this on your machine and you were working and for whatever reason your really nasty friend came by and took your drive pin out, maybe put it upside down so it would rest and the screw isn't touching here anymore, and you didn't realize and you're working away, you'll quickly notice that this isn't pushing anymore, meaning the ribber needles aren't being engaged. And that can cause all kinds of issues. Maybe not in the first row, maybe not in the second row, but very quickly after, because the stitches on the rubber needles will be held, and they can only be held so long while other stitches are happening. Anyways, so just be aware of your drive pin and don't lose it. When you are making a sock, you have the option of taking the ribber off the machine, which is what I do because it's easier for me. It doesn't take but a moment. Or what you can do is you just, instead of having it engaged as it was, you just put it there and you take it out of work and you pretty much just leave it on the machine and then work the sock. I don't like that method now that I've done every other method because you can't see in the sock, and if something ran or whatever, you can't fix it easily. So this is why I take it off. But anyways, so that's pretty much it. Let's show you how to dismantle this because we have done everything else so far. All right, so like I said before, this is a post secured only here with everything sitting on it. So if you just undid this, everything would fall. Let's try not to drop things on purpose. So using your slotted screwdriver, we want to just gently unscrew enough that it drops. See there, it dropped, and I've got it in my hand, so we're good. Be aware that this might be greasy or oily. And in case you haven't seen Supplies I Like page under my website, under Learning and Creating, or maybe it's under Supplies. There are a lot of features and things to be suggested that are helpful with the CSM, such as using clear sewing machine oil. It's not going to harm you. It's not toxic in any way, and it does wash out of fabrics. All right, so as you can see here, now it's all just layered cake. So you just gently raise up your tappet. This is what it looks like. Very cool. And we turn it over. Now, if you had a broken latch or needle and it was telling you it was broken, because you certainly can tell whenever something is broken because it'll start making more tension or it'll be a noise or something, you want to try to stop immediately, okay? Try not to force the machine almost ever unless you're 100% what's going on. If you broke a latch and you kept going, you can damage the metal. It can divot, it can make holes, it can severely damage something that won't function correctly afterwards, okay? This surface here will get marred or scratched just by nature of it going around and around against all these other surfaces, which is another point. You should try to make sure you oil everything. I'll review what you need to oil afterwards. All right, so there's not a lot to look at here. There's this one path it'll use and then another path it'll use. So when we have our tappet in work towards the center of the cylinder, then the cylinder needles are going to come out in work. They'll they'll extend, they will knit, they will go around. Pretty much there you go. Something to note when you're using your ribber, it requires a couple needles to go by in order to activate or deactivate. So if right now on my machine I was all set up and I said, okay, disengage, out of work, and I kept knitting, I wouldn't see it stop working until I saw 4 needles go by. Either it be 2 cylinder needles and 2 ribber needles or whatever. It takes the distance of working 4 needle slots in order to turn on or turn off, okay? Because when you activate or deactivate, it's still in the channels doing its thing. All right, so this is, now it's out of work. So out of work means that the ribber needles go in and they just kind of bypass the extension so they don't get knitted. It's very straightforward. You don't really need to know exactly what's happening, but it does help when something jams to know how to do it. It's very straightforward, okay? If you were thinking, oh, I should undo more things and use screwdriver to disassemble further, I wouldn't recommend undoing these. I mean, they sit perfect. You don't really have a need to. I mean, unless you're painting it like they did. Gorgeous. I never really noticed these screws before. I'd never had to undo them. I don't recommend it. But it's pretty straightforward. Give everything a wipe when you're there. I mean, you're done with that. So that's the tappet. So now we're looking at the ribber post. It's very oily, so you want to try to wipe it. This is what the bottom looks like. This is a 72 slot ribber dial that matches the 72 slot cylinder. We refer to this in modern times as an equal slot ribber. If you were considering purchasing a ribber dial, I would strongly recommend considering purchasing one that is the same number of slots as your cylinder. It gives you more options, and I'm sure you've heard that, but you didn't know what it means. Well, you can certainly do more ribbing combinations. When you are using your ribber later and you have it all set up to knit, just because mathematically certain ribbing formulations like knit 2, purl 2 or whatever, this because you can't divide any number of formulations equally doesn't mean you can't do it. You can do it, and most people don't even realize if something doesn't mathematically lay out right on your sock. But no one sees it when you've knitted it. So let's just know that just because you might like a certain ribbing pattern, a certain formulation, so many purls, so many knits, just because you like that and it doesn't mathematically equate on the cylinder you choose, don't worry. You can still do it. You will see when you try. All right, so looking at this is the same number of slots as my 72. So there's a lot of slots there. So let's just take the ribber post out. So another question I've heard is, can I use my auto knitter ribber dial with my Legare? Well, you can, but the hole is different. I think it's this one. The hole is different. So you need to make sure you use the adapter post. This is the post that came with my Legare. So you need to get an adapter post. You can get that adapter post from Jackie Grant of AutoKnitter.com. She's on my new CSM supplier page. That gives you more options, but generally if you had an auto knitter tappet or dial, they don't work on the Legare post. So they're different things. Generally at this point, I'm unsure if you would have success with an auto knitter tappet. This is a Legare on a Legare machine. I'm not sure if the height and everything lines up right. But anyways, so now that's what that post is. We're done with it. Let's put it down. Now we're going to look at this. So what came with my machine is probably what came with yours. This here. This is a bird's beak style rubber dial. And most people are like, what the heck does that even mean? Well, bird's beak refers to the curve of a bird's beak. So if you look from the bed to the inner part to the top bed there, that's a curve like a bird's beak. Now, I don't know why they called it that. Certainly, I wasn't around when they designed it, but that is why this is called a bird's beak design. And see, this is the vintage one. In vintage times, they made rubber dials that were half the number of slots as your cylinder. So my cylinder on the machine right now is a 72. This is a 36 slot. The Legare came standard with a 72 slot cylinder and a 54 slot cylinder. You can actually use this 36 slot rubber dial with your 54 cylinder. It works out mathematically for many of the ribbing patterns, and it works. If you are curious of seeing that work, just check out some of my sock videos. But when you look at this, of course, there's a lot more slots on this dial here than this. Now, this one I said was the bird's beak. Well, what is this one? Well, this is one sold by Dave Lord of Chambord CSM, and it's called a Pro Series. And what does that mean? Well, it's kind of like the Auto Knitter style, but it's a Legare dial. And what is different about it? It's got square fins and it comes right to the edge. Now, I've been led to understand, and I find this I use without issues, that with a fin that comes right to the end of the dial, the yarn, stitch, etc. have more support, and you have less issues with stitches, dropping or just having issues with. So it is actually possibly a better dial to have. So this is why I prefer the Pro Series, and this is also why I prefer to have the same number of slots as my cylinder. Now, can I use this 72 slots rubber dial with my 54 cylinder? Totally can. All right, so a benefit to having as many as the cylinder, beyond just having more ribbing potential combinations, whether or not they're mathematical or not, is that you can set up, so that would be setting that up as full pitch. That's what they call it. We don't say the word, but when you regularly line up your ribber with your machine, and some of the slots line right to the cylinder slots, so they could use the needle and make a cylinder, like they connect to each other. That is called full pitch. We rarely talk about it, but that's what it's technically called. Well, what you can do is you can set it up so the ribber needles do not align to a cylinder slot. It's set up halfway. So they call it half pitch. So why would I line a ribber needle to a fin, which is kind of like the post, instead of a cylinder slot? Well, you'd line it up when you want to engage the needle and use that needle without losing the number of stitches. That don't make any sense. Okay, so what you do is you'd use half pitch when you want to gain the number of needles on the ribber dial plus the number of needles on your cylinder. For example, with my 72 slot cylinder and my 72 slot ribber dial at half pitch, I could make an item that's 72 plus 72 stitches around. So it does allow you to make items, socks or otherwise, that perhaps have more stitches at a certain point. Let's say you're making a sock and the friend you're making it for, it's a rib sock. they want to have, or maybe they have really big calves, this will allow you to add more needles at a certain point. I mean, it's all about how you use it, using your tools you have versus having to buy more. But with also changing maybe the stitch size and depending on the fiber, you can do so much more with your machine that maybe you hadn't realized. But why you would have it for half pitch, which is a wonderful thing, is you don't need a hat making machine. You can still make hats on a machine like this, which is technically a sock knitting machine. And I am working on that project, so stay tuned. So that's what a Pro Series style is, and that's what it means when someone says bird beak, Pro Series. So when someone asks, I always recommend the Pro Series. It's a bit more money, but it's totally worth it. So that's what it looks like when you compare. Of course, you see these U-shaped things. This is the rubber stop or rubber fin that connects to the inside of the cylinder when you have that rubber accessory. And just comparing the bottom, I mean, it's pretty much, this is a modern flat one, and this is the vintage one. It is saying this is the part number 2222, and it is a 4.5-inch diameter dial for the machine. It is a 12 gauge, and it is 36 stitches. There we go. All right, you have now disassembled everything, but you haven't seen everything. What also you might have had is a stack or two of stem weights. That's a stem right there. I call these weight pucks. It doesn't really like that alignment, so let's put this one, that one, and then that one. So my machine actually came with 2 of these, with one of them kind of being more closed on the hook. I actually opened it a bit more, and I think this is that one. Just because when I use it, this is a buckle. So mine actually came with a steel colored one, and it was in poor shape. It didn't work well. It slipped and everything. So when I saw one like this on eBay, I bought it. But it's exactly the same style. This is the vintage style. There is other styles out there. All you want to do is you want to have something that you can easily put your item through and then engage. If there is my cast on bonnet hanging under the machine, I would put it eye to the sky, upright like this, and I would hang my item through from the machine. So let me just do that because I'm one-handed. And then as it goes through, now I'm through, I would look at the back, and now I would pull down on the eye and then add the weight. So now I would add my weight under the machine, and what it would do is it would stay in place. So there you go. And what's wonderful about this buckle is you will find as you work, your project gets closer and closer and closer to the floor. So all you have to do is lift, and then you're closer to the machine and less to the floor again. And then you can keep going. That's something you have to watch when you're working on the machine and you have a long project coming out the bottom, that you're not resting on the floor with your weights, because if you're resting on the floor, you're not getting the tension, you're going to drop stitches. Also, I strongly suggest using your buckle or whatever version you have and your stem weights. I like to use always, I use these 3, so the stem weight plus 2, because some person's belief, and if they're successful doing that, then bonus to you. But I'm not. So I strongly believe in order to make everything the same, you use the same tools that you have. So by adding your buckle and the weight, you don't have to pull down on your project in order to maintain that tension. You can't humanly keep even tension with one hand on your sock or your project as you work, but your weights and your buckles certainly can. So why not let them work for you? My machine also came with something called a crescent. This is what this is, crescent as in crescent moon. It's a way to easily lift a bunch of cylinder stitches, usually done when you are making a sock. If my video doesn't answer your question, you have further questions, definitely please come check out my free CSM resource. That is located online, www.csmlove.com.